Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kevin Lin, and I currently serve as the WashU Pride Alumni Network Chair, and I use he, him pronouns. On behalf of WUPAN and the WashU Alumni Association, I want to first of all wish you a happy Pride Month. And I also am very excited to welcome you to a conversation spotlighting the St. Louis Queer Plus Support Helpline, featuring two outstanding members of the WashU community, Luka and Riott Kochman. Before we begin, I would like to explain the format for today's session. You'll only hear and see myself and our presenters, and this webinar will last for about an hour. Following the conversation, we will have time for questions, and we highly encourage you to participate by asking questions at any time by typing in the Q&A box. During the Q&A session, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share on the Alumni Association YouTube channel and on our website following the event. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Travis Tucker, Associate Director of the WashU Center for Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you so much, Kevin. As he mentioned, my name is Travis Tucker. I use him as pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Director for the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and I am thrilled to serve as the facilitator for this dialogue. A little bit about why we're here today. Squish is one of the outstanding groups and individuals that we've recognized with the WUPAN Leadership Development Award, which is an award that recognizes leadership development amongst queer individuals at Washington University in St. Louis. It's a part of an award ceremony that we call the Halaba Honors, which also celebrates and highlights LGBTQIA excellence on our campus. So we have faculty members and staff members and students that are a part of that process and have served as honorees. And so we are so thrilled to spotlight the great work that Squish has been doing over the course of their few years. It made such an impact on our campus and is part of a larger movement that has been going on and not only in the St. Louis community, but within the WashU community as well. And so to know that within the LGBTQ community on our campus, it's still moving. It's still, even through COVID and COVID times, there have been gaps, but we've definitely tried to fill the gaps as best as we can in acknowledging that the work has to continue to support queer and trans students on our campus. And so as we move forward into the fall, we're so excited to continue the work and highlighting good individuals like Squish through the process of our WUPAN Leadership Development Award and also through our Halaba Honors Award ceremony. And so a little bit about our two guest speakers tonight, our esteemed speakers. So Luka is a trans-masculine, pansexual Singaporean immigrant who co-founded Squish to create a resource they wish they had. As Squish's organizational facilitator, Luka oversees various team activities and day-to-day operations. With 12 plus years of background in organizing and 300 plus hours of experience in learning and teaching peer counseling, they effectively lead and facilitate Squish's programs. They are currently taking a break from their role in supporting Jet and Cleo and taking over as interim organizational facilitators while waiting for their new work authorization card. And Riott is a genderqueer LSMW and therapist with a special interest in eating disorders and LGBTQIA+ populations. As Squish's co-founder, secretary, and curriculum developer, Riott uses their 10 plus years of curriculum development and facilitation experience to develop Squish's trauma-informed LGBTQIA affirming peer counseling curriculum. So I am so excited to introduce Luka and Riott. Please give them a hearty welcome. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for being with us today, you two.
Thank you.
Hey, all right. We are so excited for this conversation. I've been excited for this conversation all week. It's just such a thrill to hear a little bit about your work and to really showcase it to our participants tonight. So before we get into our prepared questions, we know that there were a few questions that were submitted through the registration form. And so we do want to make sure that we get to those first. And also there will be an opportunity, as mentioned earlier, for the Q&A time. So if you do have questions that you would like to share out, through the Q&A. Please feel free to use that chat feature, and we will get to that towards the end of our program. So before that, we'll get to these pre-recorded questions. So my first question is really around intersections of identity. So how have the intersections of your identity impacted how you inform the LGBTQIA community in St. Louis?
Can you repeat that one more time, Travis?
Absolutely. So how have the intersections of your identity impacted how you inform the LGBTQIA community in St. Louis?
Such a big question, right? I wonder if you want to start first.
It is a big question, and I'm not sure where to start. I think when we were exploring what Squish is and what we want it to be, we were very intentional about our own social identities. And like, I remember like our early interview process, like so much of the interview for volunteers is like, how do your social identities shape and inform who you are, how you show up, what you want to do? So I feel like I should have a well-prepared answer to this question, and the truth is I don't. I try to be like intentional and aware of, I guess, my whiteness, first of all, and like class privilege, and how I think we like to approach the queer community as a monolith, as if we have like these shared experiences, when the truth is we don't. So much is dictated and shaped by class, race, ability, status, etc. I do feel like, you know, my social identities as like a Jewish person, a disabled person, a trans person, give me a sense of like empathy for experiences that I don't have and identities that I don't claim. But empathy only gets you so far. Yeah, those are kind of my thoughts right now. It is a really big question.
Thanks for sharing, Riott. I think actually I was like, where do I begin? And I think your sharing helped me think about a few like standout moments in my work with Squish. I think the first right now what's top of mind for me is immigration status. And so through my conversations with other grassroots or nonprofit leaders in St. Louis, I've seen that predominantly the people who start nonprofits are like white and wealthy. So like people who have the resources to basically invest in something that's very risky, a lot of time, energy, emotional investment, money. So many grassroots groups struggle to get off the ground because of lack of funding. And of what I've learned over the past 2 years is like funding is such a foundation for sustainability in order to like compensate volunteers or staff for their work, in order to run programs, in order to keep the lights on. But I think like another invisible form of currency is like capacity and emotional capacity. And so one of the biggest things I struggled with in starting and sustaining Squish is burnout and people coming and going from the work. And one of the biggest barriers I face in my own capacity is my own immigration status. And so coming to the US every year is a struggle to figure out how am I going to keep staying in this country. There are a lot of people who don't understand, like, why don't you just go back to your home country? And for me, like, Singapore has been a very queerphobic and transphobic place where I've had really bad mental health issues and I'm not able to get the care I need, whether that's in terms of counseling, therapy, or hormone replacement therapy, or simply like a social environment that understands me and cares for me and won't misgender me. And so, like, the weight of immigration hangs over me in my Squish work, in that not only am I doing this work unpaid for the first 2 years, I'm also not allowed to be paid outside of my work authorization status. And so what that means is, like, as I'm doing this, providing this free labor for Squish willingly, because like I love this work and I love the people I'm working with, there's also constantly like, how am I going to keep doing this work? How am I going to pay my own rent? How am I going to renew my work authorization status? And so in the past year, I have had to like think about like what constantly is the next step, and also like I guess grow up very quickly, like do a lot of like engage a lawyer or like look into all sorts of laws and policies and try and understand them without a lot of support. And so I guess in that way, I feel like I've aged prematurely in ways that because of like immigration oppression and citizenship privilege that I don't have that have made the work a lot more stressful for me. I feel like I would love to go into like class, race, and also like neurotypicality. But Riot, did you have any responses or thoughts or things you want to share?
Um, I appreciate you sharing like your perspective and experience. I think like so many folks in Squish have looked at you as like a bedrock, like this foundation to the organization. And I think it's important for us to hear what this past year is like and what the next few months look like. Yeah, those are my thoughts. I do think it is important to also touch on like ability, class, race, etc. I don't know, Travis, if you had like follow-up thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I mean, first off, thank you so much for sharing and being so authentic in both of your voices and your lived experiences. And I think that, Riot, part of what I am like thinking about a follow-up and thinking about, where we go, your services is helped fill such a hole within our community. And in my capacity as the assistant director for LGBTQI involvement, I heard a lot about how your service and resource really has become a tool for individuals across the city to find support in a way that they may not have. And so what I'm curious about in your experiences is in leading, this organization, or what are some of the common themes that you hear from people? And you started touching on some of them, but I would love for you all to just share a little bit about from what you're hearing from individuals across our region about themes of needs.
I think, Luka, you can probably speak to this better than I can. But Travis, as you were talking, it's really like nice to hear like the service has filled a gap, and my mind immediately went to like, well, what about all the ways that we are failing to fill gaps, right? Like I'm thinking like we are just now like being really intentional about how do we reach queer immigrants, for example. And so like I want to hold the like pride and like, yes, we are filling gaps while also naming and acknowledging the ways we are failing to do so.
Yeah, two thoughts. The first is we have compiled some of the topics that come up on calls, and we're really careful about keeping caller data confidential and private, so no identifiable information is collected or saved. And so, thinking about the data that we do have, we see that on calls, by far the two top topics that come up are mental health and housing. So housing is a frequent call topic and a frequent call challenge. Um, Through our conversations with community partners, we find that the housing and shelter system is severely lacking in terms of serving queer and trans people. And so there are people who go to shelters and who are bullied or discriminated against or face a lot of hostility or even physical or sexual violence from other shelter residents. So knowing that shelters are not safe, often not safe for queer and trans people, right? Sometimes on calls, we have to safety plan around encampments or tents or relying on like informal social support or community safety nets, which often are not 100% safe or don't come through. So I think housing and mental health are two of the biggest topics that come up, followed by I think queerphobic family, friends, roommates, sexual health, abuse, substance use, coming out, gender transitions. I think some of the other topics that come up. I think Riot mentioned some gaps in our services, and I think this connects to what I wanted to discuss with regards to like socioeconomic status and class for the previous question, which is despite the stress I've had to face as an immigrant, I think I'm also able to do this work as someone who comes from a middle to upper middle class family background. So like I'm able to do this work for free for the first 2 years because my parents are able to give me an allowance and sustain my work. And like even though they're not 100% supportive, they kind of tolerate it and like continue to feed me and give me money so that I can be housed. I think this is not true for a lot of people who volunteer for Squish. And so volunteering, I think, is predominantly like can be a very like privileged activity, right? Like the people that we see are able to volunteer and give up surplus time and energy are often people who can afford to do that instead of solely like worry about survival needs or basic needs. So I think like one of the accessibility barriers to volunteering with Squish is simply like time, energy, money, which is related to class. And so that's honestly like such a big barrier. I've felt a bit despairing at times about how to address it. Like we're a predominantly white organization, and that's related to class as well. And so I think part of my burnout is like, where do we get the money to diversify our base and pay our staff when we're also trying to just have the money to run our programs and kind of keep the lights on at the same time? And like, where do we get the funding to, when like often like I think like funding streams want you to like prove your success as an organization before they're willing to fund you. But then in order to prove our success as an organization, we need the funding to support our programs and our people. So yeah, I think like class and like wealth and funding is like not often like the sexy side of like social justice work or grassroots work, but it's one of the things I worry about almost every day.
Thank you so much for that. And something that Riott shared a little bit earlier made me think of a follow-up to what both of you shared. And navigating all of the varied thing and all of the varied services and acknowledging, wow, you know, you, as I mentioned, that you are filling one gap, that there are many others that are out there within the work for queer and trans individuals within the city. And I'm curious because you do this work every day and navigating competing interests and navigating how you're going to scaffold out services and support. And so over the course of time, how does that process look for Squish? How do you navigate competing interests within the community? And how does that process, I think, come out in your day-to-day work?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about what you mean by competing interests?
Absolutely. So I think as you shared a little bit that while there are pieces that having the organization is a start, there are always going to be different things that are happening within the community that are going to raise needs. There are going to be issues that are going to be standards that are going to occur and reoccur. And so how does Squish as an organization or the leaders of the organization navigating those things that pop up that might present themselves next to things that are going to be standards that are going to continue to happen to queer and trans individuals on a daily basis? Because I think that you as leaders are dealing with that every day. And I think that you have tools that you can give to us as we do that within our day-to-day lives.
I'm smiling because like, I hope we have tools, but I don't really know what they are. I mean, I think we have conversations and we show up like as a community and create space to talk through these things. Because you were talking earlier about like funding and burnout, I just like, I felt this like the catch-22, like this tension of like, we need to do the thing to get money, but if we don't have money, we can't do the thing. And it's like this really hard place to be. And Travis, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, yes, there are lots of competing interests, and it's important for me to remember that the folks who make up Squish are part of the community that Squish is serving, right? We are a community made like by and for the LGBTQIA plus community in St. Louis, which doesn't mean all of our interests like align perfectly all the time, but I think maybe that's one of our tools or approaches is we're able to remind ourselves what like we are needing, what people we know are needing. And I'd like to think we are very like values driven. Like when it comes down to it, we're like, okay, what are our values? what is one step we can take towards alignment with those values? I hope this is making sense. Luke, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That was actually aligned a lot with what I was gonna say. I think when we're trying to navigate competing priorities, we try and take a margins to center approach. So like centering the most marginalized voices, interests, experiences. So for example, when we make calls to people who request a call from Squish, we call from an anonymous number because we know that queer youth especially are not often in safe spaces where they can just talk or applies more generally and broadly to queer and trans people, but especially queer and trans youth or closeted individuals or questioning individuals. So even though maybe queer and trans youth or questioning individuals make up a small proportion of our callers, centering those needs because like these needs are often on the margin and not considered. Or when we are organizing events, prioritizing queer and trans people of color, when we are thinking about the accessibility of our different services. We're trying to work towards making our services accessible in multiple languages and accessible to deaf and hard of hearing people. And I think this comes from like also the personal experience of talking to other services and trying to ask for really basic things for trans people, like can you put your pronouns, can you state your pronouns when you introduce yourselves, and sort of the reaction we get is often like, that's so niche, like we don't even know if we serve trans people. And I just want to say, like, you definitely probably serve trans people, you just don't know it. So kind of this feeling of like being treated as niche or as like a very like severe minority, so much so that like if we accommodate your interests, we're gonna feel weird, or like people are gonna think we're weird. And we really, I think from those kinds of personal experiences, we want to make sure that nobody who uses our services feels that way. And then I think the second way in which we try and navigate our priorities is to capitalize on our strengths, not capitalize, build on our strengths, use our strengths, right? So we know that we're really good at being in the mental health field. We're really good at peer support, peer counseling, non-hierarchical support, grassroots organizing. And so we support, but don't try and do everything. So we, support housing efforts. We support like food vouchers, we support food pantries, and we try and support our partners who do advocacy or policy work, but we kind of don't want to do everything. And so in that way, make the use most of the resources that we do have and the passions that are in the organization. And then I think the final thing I want to add is what Rai was saying about internal community building. I think whenever we're feeling tired or burnt out, for me, my priority is to preserve the capacity that is within the organization rather than sort of go out and recruit more new volunteers to try and fill that capacity. So sort of taking care of our people internally first before we try and do more or extend ourselves.
Thank you both so much. And I think that piece of self-care is such an important lesson, and not just self-care, but also community care, as individuals that are already minoritized on a regular basis. How do you not only take care of yourself, but take care of the people that are around you? So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to ask a question, and the pieces of this came out in some of your answers, but just around the broader St. Louis community, around activism and how that looks, particularly for queer and trans individuals. And thinking about our community, while we have plenty of queer and trans individuals within our space, we recognize that the systems of oppression are real, and that they are a daily, sometimes hourly basis for many folks. So my question is, how does activism, in your perspective, for queer and trans folks look in the St. Louis community?
Do you want to start?
I can try to start. I think activism for the queer and trans community in St. Louis looks like there are as many ways to like be involved in activism as there are queer and trans people in St. Louis. I think, and I know this is an alumni event, but if I can just be blunt and honest, one of my frustrations, like as a WashU student, was I think there were occasionally two like narrow definitions of what activism or advocacy looks like, or should look like. I'm painting with like broad strokes here, but I did get that sense sometimes. And I think something that makes Squish so unique and special is it's not like the typical, I went to the Brown School, and like as a social work student, it's not like the typical path. Like most Brown School students are joining some already established nonprofit in St. Louis that does this type of advocacy. And this type of advocacy is usually like, I don't want to say it's not community-based. It's all community-based, but it's more like policy-driven and focused. And if that's your lane, awesome. That's amazing. We need that. And I just want to remind folks listening that like your activism can look like mutual aid in your community, like getting to know your neighbors and meeting them where they're at, and like filling these gaps that we're talking about. Like, do you need help with groceries this week? Can I look after the kids? Like, especially when we're talking about like capacity building as an organization, I think our activism looks like supporting each other so we can do this work in a more sustainable way. Yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I'll have more thoughts after I hear from Luka.
Yeah, actually that sparked something that I'm very passionate about talking about, which is like, I think it's really important that activism start from a place of active listening and empathetic listening. For me personally, like I've been in a lot of, in the organizing and activism social circles I'm in, I often find there's an emphasis on action or being loud or being visible or kind of being the one up there and talking. And there's not a lot of emphasis on listening or relationship building. One of the people I admire the most in St. Louis is Julia Ho. And I think like connecting with her for me emphasized the importance of relationship building and sort of taking a back seat when and letting other people sort of feel empowered to take up space. So one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about Squish's work is we teach the principles and practice of peer counseling. But a lot of peer counseling is just listening and helping other people speak. And so one of my frustrations when I'm not in a Squish space or a peer counseling space is like, oh my God, people are so bad at listening, or they summarize what I say. I'm like, that is not what I said at all. And you know, I think the interpersonal connections where we feel heard and uplifted, and as a result feel more motivated to work together, are so undervalued. And I think sometimes people think about activism as like taking place in a vacuum, or like you just join a protest or you just join a demonstration and you don't know anyone else, and you just, something happens, like you take action and you're standing up for yourself and your community. And I feel like so much background work, organizers do so much background work behind the scenes, like build relationships with the people they're working with so that people can trust each other when they go to a protest together. So I think like more listening. And I think something else that struck me is that like queer and trans folks are everywhere in St. Louis and participate in all kinds of movements. And I think being willing to participate in movements where queer and trans is not centered is also important, right? This is not like, yeah, even like events that are not like labeled as like, this is a queer and trans march for Black lives, for example. Like, I think being willing, of course, like, I think like considering personal safety is also really important, but also like being willing to go to things that are not labeled as like a queer and trans community for some other community event is also really important. If that makes any sense, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I was, as you were talking, like I'm thinking about my current job where I sometimes struggle to be like, what am I doing that's like creating change? And I think a lot of times I approach activism with that lens of like, what is the like major structural and systemic change that I'm creating? And as I was listening to you talk about listening and peer counseling, I'm like, yes, that's it. It really all comes down to, not all of it, but so much of it comes down to relationships, And really, like for me in my current job and for me in my work with Squish, it's about creating safety for people who, like, I'll speak from my own experience, like as a like queer and trans person, as a queer and trans young person, what I needed was spaces to like express and explore my identity where I felt rooted in safety. And when I didn't have that, it resulted in me like hiding parts of myself in order to feel safe. And so what I want my activism to look like is probably like what I needed, which was that space. And I think Luka, you like so eloquently said that so much of it comes down to that relational piece, the creating of space, and these like listening skills that we don't do a great job of teaching each other. So when we hear the word activism, I think we go really big. I know my mind jumps to like I said earlier, what's the like large structural and systemic change that I'm creating? And in my day-to-day work, my activism is like, can I create a sense of safety for someone in this like 50 minutes or hour, 20 minutes or whatever it is, that's life-changing.
Yeah. Oh, if I can add on to that, I feel like getting to know you too, Riott, also like I was a lot more invested in the importance of facilitation. And I learned a lot about facilitation from you, Riott, and from other trainers through Squish's training program. I think for me, facilitation essentially is about like democratizing leadership and like maximizing engagement from everyone involved. I think even the small act of like facilitating a meeting where everyone feels engaged and like their input matters goes like, I don't know, I feel like I've been in a lot of like organizing or activism meetings where like two people are talking to each other and everyone else is kind of listening. And then when we call another meeting, like nobody comes back because like people didn't feel like their voice mattered. And I think part of it feels like kind of like it feels very general, but also like there's some very specific tactics and techniques for facilitating where we are drawing the best and most out of every person and drawing on their strengths. And I think the work I've done at Squish, where like basically building an organization from the ground up involves kind of like knowing people and understanding people's strengths and then like channeling them towards the best ways in which they can contribute to the organization. And there've been a lot of ways in which I've not done well at that, and ways in which I realized like that is one of my most important roles at Squish. So I feel like activism for me, at the root of it for me, is like listening and facilitation, in order to like maximize other people's strengths in the room.
Thank you so much. And I think two things that really struck me about the dialogue that you two just had was around particularly active listening and what a gift to give to a population that is constantly misunderstood, whether as a community or individually, to be able to give back a sense of understanding through active listening and active engaging. That's just such a gift. And another thing that I really appreciated that you both said, I think Luka at the intro, and then Riott said it a little bit, was really helping to create a space that you wish that you had in a previous period. And I just think that is so fantastic that both of you have taken the time and to devote that and to create a space for individuals that you wish you did have. So thank you so much. So thinking about the work and acknowledging that the work continues to change, where do you see the work of Squish going in the next 5 years? And if that's too far away, we can pare it down to the next year or next 3 years. But in general, where do you see the work going in the future?
Right? Do you want to start? I feel like I get ideas from hearing you start first.
Oh dear.
No pressure.
I don't know. Sometimes I don't know what the work looks like in the next 5 minutes, let alone the next 5 years. I mean, I think I also like for those watching who like don't know me or my role in Squish, it has taken much more of a backseat recently. I'm on the board, I'll do things like this. I try to like consult people about lesson plans and whatnot, but I am a little bit less like in the work than I used to be. So I don't feel super qualified to speak on it. I have all these like pipe dreams of what I want Squish to be and look like, and it involves us growing and expanding, not just in St. Louis, but in the surrounding areas. I think going back to something Luka said earlier, like when we're at our best, we're doing what we do best, which is like relying on our peer counseling skills, our active listening, our community building, and our facilitation. So I would love to see Squish grow into this organization that makes these skills accessible to the broader community. And I think we've started doing that with our like community peer counseling series, which I'm sure Luka, you can speak more about. But yes, in thinking about like, we were both saying like, we're trying to build what we didn't have, and voicing frustrations with like, active listening is so essential. Why don't we all have these skills? Like I could teach a third grader how to like listen reflectively and ask open-ended questions and they'd get it, but we don't do that. So I think part of my pipe dream is seeing Squish continue to grow into this organization that makes these skills accessible to all.
Yes, and that definitely sparked ideas for me, Riott.
You're welcome.
I think for me, so speaking more of like from a day-to-day operations perspective, I would love for our programs to synergize with each other so that the micro level work we do feeds into the macro level work that we do and vice versa. So I would love for a helpline to not just sort of be a band-aid solution to some of the oppression that queer and trans people face, but rather that the data we're able to collect anonymously and consensually through the helpline feeds into our data advocacy program, where we identify trends in some of the needs that people are calling in, compile those into data reports, and use them to advocate for the community's needs, right? So the housing calls we're getting, if we identify trends and the barriers that unhoused people are facing that are queer and trans specific, we bring those to housing providers, to the continuum of care, and advocate for some of these needs and advocate for solutions that address root causes. I think it's really important that a helpline does not stay stagnant as just a direct service, but rather tries and address some of the root causes for which people are calling. And then I think also our training and education programs, making some of these skills more accessible to service providers, to queer community members, so that people can use these skills in their day-to-day life. And so the impact of our programs is not just confined to the times in which people call, but rather to the friend groups they're in, the families that they're in that are becoming more affirming, the service providers that they meet that are starting to use their pronouns correctly. So expanding our training and education programs and making them more accessible, as Riott said. And then I think I would love for our resource spreadsheet to grow into a resource database and become publicly accessible, sort of like a Yelp for queer people and allies. So right now our spreadsheet catalogs over 1,000 St. Louis resources. I would love for that to be more user-friendly. It's a tool that our volunteers use while they're on shift to help callers identify suitable resources. It's one of the most advanced, sophisticated ways I've seen people search for resources. I think most nonprofits have sort of a resource manual that's a Word document that's maybe difficult to search or not nuanced, or you can't sort or filter it by specific needs or accommodations, for example. I would love for our resource spreadsheet to become a pioneer in the way in which nonprofits are doing resource referrals. And then I think finally, I would love for our volunteer engagement program to really get off the ground and have more and more community members become engaged in not just using our services, but crafting the services that they will be using. So having community members be the driving force behind how our other programs shape out and evolve, I think will be kind of a really authentic approach to being a community-based organization. And then I think finally, as always, like capacity building. If I could get paid for my work, if Jen and Cleo could get paid for our work, I think we'd be able to do it without worrying about other ways that we're trying to sustain our basic needs. Finally, we have some good news to share, which is we were recently awarded the Chiron Fund by the St. Louis Community Foundation. We've been awarded $30,000 per year for up to 5 years. And this project will fund free counseling and therapy for Squish's Helpline volunteers, because we know that taking calls on the line can create vicarious trauma and accumulate burnout and compassion fatigue. So the free counseling and therapy is meant to address that and support a Helpline volunteers' capacities, as well as provide feedback for those counselors and therapists in terms of how they can be more LGBTQIA affirming. So it's a really unique opportunity for therapists or counselors or clinicians to be getting real-time, accurate, specific feedback about their practice and how they can be more queer affirming to their clients. So that's a project we're going to be embarking in the next 1 to 5 years to hopefully improve the continuum of care for mental health for queer and trans St. Louisans. So I think that's going to be another big project in the next 1 to 5 years.
Well, first off, congratulations. That is a huge accomplishment, and talk about helping to build out the capacity of your organization. Huge kudos, and I have the ability to help build out and to continue thinking through whether that's through the process of active listening or engaging, but then also the piece of building out tools for individuals it most. So thank you so much. We want to give an opportunity for our audience to ask questions. So if you have a question for either Luka or Riott, you can feel free to type that into the Q&A box, and we will go ahead and read that off live. So we will give people a moment to do that. And as we are giving people a moment to do that, I'll go back to another pre-question that came in. How can WashU alum best support Squish? So knowing that there might be some WUPAN members that are a part of this dialogue tonight, how can they best support Squish?
I think that depends on like you and your capacity and your interest. I don't want the first thing I say to be money, but the first thing I'm going to say is like money. And as much as we need funding to make this like sustainable and to like compensate our volunteers, if that's like not within your scope or not accessible to you right now, like publicity, like sharing our resource, sharing our events. If you're interested in volunteering with us, there's so many ways to get involved. It doesn't have to be like as a Helpline volunteer. It could be as a bookkeeper. Like we, as a community-based organization, we want to, Luka, you said I don't want to use the word capitalize earlier, but that's the word that comes to mind. Like capitalize on the strengths of the people who make up this community. So if you're like a graphic designer, or you love doing social media, or if you are like sitting there like, oh, active listening sounds really important, I don't know if I'm good at it, you can find out if you're good at it. And it is a skill that can be developed and practiced over time. So it depends what you have capacity for. If you have capacity for donating, awesome. If you have capacity for like volunteering 10 hours a week, awesome. If you have capacity for volunteering like 10 hours a month, that's also like, we can meet you there. And if none of those things are within your wheelhouse, then sharing us as a resource.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Riott said. I think right now the number one most helpful way to support is to donate. We recently hired 2 interim staff members because I am not currently authorized to work because my work authorization card expired in May. I'm waiting for my new work authorization card, and during this time, being able to sustain our staff financially is really important to us. $40, a $40 donation will fund 1 month of community outreach. $50 funds 1 month of phone bills. $125 funds 1 month of rent. So I think like one of the best ways to support us financially is to become a monthly donor, and that doesn't have to be, it can be any amount that you feel comfortable with. As Riott said, the second best way to support is to volunteer. I'm going to read out some of the roles that we most need right now. They are fundraising coordinator, bookkeeper, grant writer, program evaluator, press and media coordinator, graphic designer, and IT support specialist. I think finally, some other ways you can support are to encourage whatever organizations you're part of to partner with Squish, helping us do outreach, especially to underserved communities in St. Louis, and supporting our events, right? So if you want to attend our monthly peer counseling courses, we have like standard tickets, which are $20 each, but we also have pay what you can tickets and free tickets, and we want to make our events as accessible as possible. So supporting any of our programming, participating, telling other people about them would all be really helpful ways to support.
Okay, thank you so much. And we will definitely make sure to leave time to want to share out any last information or drop anything in the chat so that individuals can stay connected. We will definitely do that. Okay, so notice that we have a Q&A comment, so I'll read it out. So not so much of a question, but more of a comment. I really appreciate both of you being here and your authenticity and honesty in this conversation. There is strength in knowing what you don't know, saying it out loud, and also continuously trying to identify gaps while going forward in this work. And Riott, yes, please continue to be blunt. Alumni and students need to hear this. I am here for all of it. So thank you so much, Patricia, for that comment. And then Sarah had a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read that off. So how did you create this model that differs so much from other nonprofits? Speaking of the skills you teach, are there any plans to teach or act as consultants for other nonprofits who might want to use this model, or even teach interpersonal communications in college or high school settings?
Luka, I'm going to let you tackle that one first.
Yeah, if this is Sarah in Squish, hi Sarah. How did we create this model? I think I was really fortunate to be part of a, hi Sarah. I was really fortunate to be part of a non-hierarchical group that addressed relationship and sexual violence and taught peer counseling. And being a part of that group changed my life. It taught me how to witness and facilitate non-hierarchical decision making. It taught me how much a group of people can do, when we're mission focused and able to make decisions consensually and uplift each other's skills. And it also taught me like how much learning peer counseling can improve group culture and improve interpersonal relationships, not just when provided as a service on the line. At the same time, there were gaps that I felt were present in that group. And so in creating Squish, I was like, what were things I was not happy with? And how can I change that for Squish? So I think being in that group gave me a really strong start. And I was really fortunate to have that experience. And then taking all of the things that I wish were changed in that group and bringing that to Squish. So like improving our recruitment process, improving our training process, working with other community partners instead of working in a silo. And then to answer your second question, to act as consultants, I think right now we want to be getting more training experience under our belt. So we are providing customized trainings for other partner organizations who want to invest in the peer counseling model or learn peer support skills. So actually tomorrow we are starting a 19-hour training course for the Kansas City Anti-Violence Project, KCAVP. They're hoping to relaunch the hotline. And so we're teaching these skills to the hotline staff. So I think consultation is definitely on the horizon. And I think using some of the training experience we're accumulating now for that consultation will probably make at least myself feel less like an imposter. I've never done consultation before. Finally, teaching interpersonal communication in college or high school settings would be amazing. I feel like, Riott, that's kind of one of your dreams that you mentioned earlier. I think right now we're probably in the process of building credibility and learning how to adapt these skills to college or high school settings. But I think these skills are widely applicable and we would love to teach in schools. As Riott mentioned, one of my questions growing up is like, why is everyone so bad at listening? Why am I so bad at listening? Why aren't we being taught how to connect with each other? And so having this curriculum become more mainstream in the sense of being more widely taught in schools would be amazing. And it's like the vision I would have for like how my life would be useful and have achieved its purpose if I could teach this curriculum in schools. Back to Riott.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add about the creation of this model. A mutual friend introduced me to Luka, and I was like, cool, let me do this with you. In terms of like consulting or teaching this in college or high school settings, so I work as a therapist at an eating disorder treatment center, and sometimes I run groups on like peer counseling skills, and it's literally just like applying the Squish curriculum. That's not like a formal like Squish thing, but like that is one of my dreams. It's like folks who like go through this training are able to, it has this like ripple effect. I can teach to other people, and you see how life-changing it is for folks who just struggle to communicate. Like, okay, like my family dynamics are really like not great. How can I apply some of these skills that I'm learning? How can I like practice them and apply them to my life? And the like, there are these just like moments where it like all connects and someone's like, oh, if I ask a question slightly differently, like I get such a different answer from my kid when they come home from school, something like that. Or like, oh, like me changing 2 or 3 words really creates like almost this like energetic shift in terms of like someone feeling validated, seen, and understood. And it feels like witchcraft. It feels really magical. And we can all like teach each other how to do this. It does take some practice. Yeah, kind of a tangent, not really related to like Squish plans to like teach or consult, but my hope is that like every Squish member who like goes through this, you know, I know they find ways to apply it in their own lives, and it does have that ripple effect.
Thank you so much. And that was far from a tangent. Thank you, both of you, for sharing all of that. So I just, I think that as we get close to wrapping up, I'm just really curious about what keeps you involved in this work. I know that in the hour that we've spent together, we've talked about the many positives. We talked about some of the setbacks that go along with this work. And recognizing that they both sit in the same space. Overall, as you reflect on your work with Squish in the past and hopefully in the future, what keeps you involved in this work?
What keeps me involved is I think the work is pretty cool. It really stands out from anything else I've ever done. It feels really special. I feel like grateful and honored to be able to do this kind of work. It's just different from anything else I've ever done. And then ultimately what keeps me involved is the people. Like I said, I have taken several steps back and am not as involved with Squish, and it would be impossible for me to just completely give it up. Because in a lot of ways, this is like my community, this is my family. We have like fostered really amazing and intentional connections. And that is rare and really hard to do in 2021.
Yeah, I think echo everything Riott said. I think also for me, as a young trans immigrant, it's gonna be really hard for me to find anywhere else that values me as much, if I'm being honest. Like that employers already like kind of screen out immigrants that they have to apply for visas for example. That's like a time, energy, monetary costs. And then also to find a place that's going to respect my pronouns, has built-in gender neutral bathrooms on site, and also that will like listen to what I have to say as a young person right out of college. I think, right before this, well, not right before, a couple of years before, I was interning at the state courts in Singapore, which is one of the most conservative and structured institutions in Singapore. And like I I did a proposal on restorative justice and proposed some suggestions about how to implement that into court processes. And I put out the proposal and I have no idea where it went. Like, I don't know who read it. I don't know who and made any changes based on it. I don't know if the whole organization actually even buys into restorative justice, or if this is like a side niche project for an intern to do. And so if I'm being honest, like part of what keeps me in a squish is sort of the feeling that I can work with the people here to make actual change. Or like if we want to do something, like we can really work on it and change the ways in which things are structured in Squish, and also that the processes and institutions that Squish interacts with. And so for me, like empowerment is part of the core of why I stay with Squish, and the idea that like I'm valued here and I value the people I'm working with and the work we do is valuable. I feel like really keeps me even when things are really hard. And so sometimes this work is like not enjoyable and sometimes I'm very tired and burnt out. But sort of feeling like um, I have found like something that gives me a lot of purpose and meaning, and I feel very supported doing it most of the time. And this could turn into something that'll be really sustainable in the long run for myself and other people. I think that's kind of right now what I'm holding on to.
Well, thank you both so much. And I must say, I have a very clear memory of Luka coming into my office with this idea of Squish very, very clearly. So to have from that moment of them coming into my office and saying, "Hey, I want to start this thing," to us being here it's pretty incredible. So a huge kudos to both of you for everything that you've done, and for all the people that you're making an impact on. And so with that, I want to give you all a huge thank you so much to everybody for attending. We're very grateful that you've chosen to spend part of your evening with us, learning a little bit about Squish and learning a little bit about how they've made an impact in our community. And you can definitely take a look at our chat to see some more information about the organization and to find ways to get involved. So thank you so much and have a great night.